if you have ever been interested in anything to do with startups, funding, venture capital, this is the show that you do not want to miss, because today we are privileged to have Jackie.
Hi, my name is Jackie. I'm an ecosystem builder in the venture capital space.
What is the biggest misconception we have about venture capital?
I have a great business, I'm a great founder, and as soon as I approach investors, I'm going to get this funding. Also just having the assumption that, investors have free money flowing around, at any businesses.
What is the real difference between our venture capital and startup world compared to the Western one?
If you're building a business in Africa, then you have to approach it from a long-term perspective. At the end of the day, investor money or no investor money, you still need your customers. Investor money can only do so much for you. Yeah.
Do I start a business knowing very well that I need it to be in Uganda and start building and creating the structures for that to happen now?
Think global, but start small. Some of our businesses you'll find, if you look very keenly, they could be things that only work in Nairobi, for example, like very specific geographies. Yeah.
So where are people fucking up?
The suitability or the business fit. Yeah. Probably it was not a really needed solution that you are trying to create, and there are other options for your customers.
Welcome to Successful Fuckups and Karibu Sana, the show where we get to discuss or redefine success one fuck up at a time. We're not trying to put failure on a pedestal, but I think in many ways in life we learn a lot from what we do not achieve sometimes, and sometimes from the mistakes that we make. And if you have ever been interested in anything to do with startups, funding, venture capital, this is the show that you do not want to miss, because today we are privileged to have Jackie. Is Jackie the best? Can we say Jackie or Jacqueline?
Yeah, Jackie.
Earlier on you told me Jacqueline makes you feel like it's your mom calling you.
Yeah.
Is it a millennial? Is it that millennial thing?
Yes, precisely.
Millennials. Trauma.
Yeah.
All right. So, karibu sana.
Asante.
Today's conversation is something that is also quite close to my heart, because it's a lot to do with the place where we are at as an African continent, Kenya.
Yeah.
If you're in business, you're always thinking capital, you're always thinking venture funding, and so on and so forth. And so many people have. But it always appears to be one of those subjects that have two sides. There are people who understand and thrive in it.
Yeah.
And then there's the rest of us who sometimes sit in a place we do not know what's happening. So today we just kind of want to get into the cracks of it and discuss a lot in between. What mistakes are we making? What are the things that we should know? What can we... we just want to learn from you, in short. So today is like a lesson.
Okay.
Yeah? No pressure. No pressure.
I already feel the pressure.
You already
but
do
it's
it.
Okay. I'll drink my water.
All right. So, Jackie, I think we'll just go straight into it. You sit in a place where you have a very clear understanding, especially in East Africa, on matters capital and funding.
Yeah.
Who's being funded, who's not, why, and so on and so forth. Now, based on that, I think I just want to start from this point. What is the biggest misconception we have about venture capital when it comes to Africa and even Kenya, if you like?
A very good question, but first of all, thank you for having me.
Karibu.
I like the title of the podcast, Successful Fuckups. So I think, I'd say the biggest misconception is perhaps lack of knowledge or awareness of what venture capital is. And for those who know about venture capital, there's also lack of understanding of how it works and how it fits your business needs, right? So when you start building and discover you need to sort of get some investor support, I think the first thing that comes to your mind is, I have a great business, I'm a great founder, and as soon as I approach investors, I'm going to get this funding.
The open wallets.
That's not the case. The money is there, yes, it's looking for opportunities, but there's a lot that goes into making that decision as to whether or not an investor would want to invest in your business. So that is one point that I think approaching investors from an entrepreneur's point of view, you need to be very aware of what kind of investors you're approaching and why you're even approaching these investors and what you really need for your business. You know, sometimes you start a business in good faith, and sometimes you're just doing well on your own until it gets to a point where now you're growing very fast and you realize you do not have the resources to keep up with the growth trajectory, and so you need some capital injection. But without understanding precisely what sort of investment you need, I think that is a first mistake that any entrepreneur can make. And also just having the assumption that, you know, investors have free money flowing around, throw around at any businesses. That's not the case. It's important to understand that it's a decision that could take 1 year to almost 2 years before you get access to that financing. And so at what point do you even think of approaching an investor to begin with? Do you wait until you're, you know, at a dead end, like you're about to collapse, and without this investor's money, then you're out of business? Or do you plan better and thoroughly and anticipate? So approaching an investors with anticipation in mind that I need this capital and I'll need it at this time. Without me accessing this financing today, my business will still be operational. And that means you've built a business that's proven its viability, you have your customers on board, and there's potential for you to generate revenues with or without the investors. So I think the first point is think of sustainability from a core business fundamental, not just building a business and having an idea thinking you'll have an investor coming in to now throw money at you to help grow this and this into, you know, a big venture. So build it, have clear strategies of how you're growing the business, who you're bringing on board, who you have on your team, and how that team functions before you even, you know, start thinking of bringing in an external investors. Also, having businesses that are not very well structured. You know how we start business and it's just, for most of us here in Kenya, business is just biashara, you know? We are entrepreneurs, but just a means to an end. So try and have formal structures in place from the word go if you want to, at some point, consider looking for external financing, because those are some of the things that will contribute to how this decision is made. Yeah.
Okay.
And also, if you're looking for financing, you need to be able to convince these investors that you are solving a real problem and something that, you know, you're not just solving a problem, but it's relatable, yeah? So that then translates to your customer retention, which is then a huge contributor to your success rates for the business. Because at the end of the day, investor money or no investor money, you still need your customers. Investor money can only do so much for you. Yeah, it accelerates, but you need your customers as your core source of revenue.
Okay, there's something you've mentioned around approaching investors, and what you said that you need to know where you're approaching a certain investor. And so other than the capital injection that I'm looking for, what else should I be considering when I'm thinking of, I have this pool of investors, I want to approach one? What else should I be thinking about?
Other than the capital, you know, when investors come on board, if they're going to give you capital, there's different ways to structure it. There are those who will give you, you know, a debt sort of financing. There are those who will want equity, so shareholding. And I've had very many interesting conversations with entrepreneurs who now think just because an investor is asking for equity in return, they do not have their best interest at heart and they want to take my business away from me, when that is not the case. And when this happens, I've seen cases where entrepreneurs will really need to have these conversations with investors, but at the same time, they're holding back because they think sharing their ideas with the investors would give investors, will open, sort of floodgates for investors to just take advantage of them, which is not the case.
It's a fear thing.
It's a fear thing. Like, I'm telling you about my business, but if you don't give me this financing, then it means I've given you my idea and you're going to implement. Yeah, you're going to take it somewhere else. You forget that this investor, their expertise and focus is on investing and helping you grow the business, which means if they start looking at you as a potential investee company, it means they have to also see very clearly how best they can support you to grow the business beyond capital injection. So you're looking at mentorship, for example. These investors come with networks that they could open up to you to, facilitate, like if you need partnerships, if you need to unlock, compliance issues. So they have a wide
So it's not just
range
money.
of benefits. It's not just money. There's networks, there's mentorship, there's strategy. So you need to also look at investors who are very experienced in your sector or your industry, so that they come with that.
Value.
Yeah, they add value to the business and not just giving you money, because they're not going to give you money and walk away. They also need to make sure that
They get their return.
They get their return, and that means they are going to dedicate time into helping you, along the way. So it's also very important to look at how well aligned you are in terms of thinking, in terms of values. It's very important, because there's also a risk where you could take on an investor's money and then post-investment you have a fallout, for example, like the relationship doesn't work. So you need to know your investors, do your background checks to understand what they do, what they focus on, who else are they, investing in, and what are their terms, what are their considerations. Then that helps you to approach the right kind of investors, and also to avoid just showing up to any investor thinking every investor who has money is the same. Yeah. So that having that awareness of how can I better leverage this investor, not just on the capital side, but on the other non-financing benefits to my business.
It's a very cool. I think we'll unpack it even more.
Yeah.
But I even want to maybe take a step back, because your CV has also been quite interesting.
A roller coaster.
Yeah, you studied. I think from if I'm not wrong, you studied English lit. You've been an admin.
Yeah.
At what point did you realize that you were playing a different game, and how was that sort of like? What was it, an intentional path, or is it something that you're like, walk us through it?
Yeah. Okay. That one. I don't know. One thing that I would say I've always known about me is I'm always excited about new things. So learning about new things and being very experimental, which can sometimes get you into trouble. Teaching was never my first choice for anything I wanted to do. In fact, I did not want to do it at all. But I found myself starting there, and perhaps that was how it was meant to play out for me. They say sometimes life happens for a reason. Yeah, so the path is the path. And I remember fighting going towards that direction. And just after high school, when I started seeking advice from people, I got all sorts of advice. There were people who believed 100% sure teaching is the way to go. Or if you're not a teacher, go be a nurse. So I was pushed. I wanted to do something totally different. And then I was told, you know what, it's not marketable. You know how you get those advice of this is not marketable, you'll not get a job.
No jobs.
And bottom line is everyone looking at is the job you get permanent and pensionable, yeah? So I decided to then as it so happened, eventually I ended up in teaching, and I decided to take it, but I knew I didn't want to do it for a long time. So I kept asking questions and trying to find answers of how I can pivot. So while having these conversations, I got a very, in my second year, I guess, that's when you start, you're doing just pretty much, you're covering all courses and topics. But in second year now, you need to specialize. Yeah. So then I got a very good advice from someone who told me, teaching, first of all, is very universal and you can easily fit anywhere. So just go with it, but start thinking of what else you can do immediately after you graduate so that you can now build on the skills or whatever else that you want to do. So with that advice in mind, I kept asking, so what else can I do? If I want to do an additional course or training, what else can I do? So based on, questions, asking questions, thinking about my life as well and what I see myself doing. So it was mostly leaning more towards, management of some sorts. I wanted to do business management, but for some reason that didn't go through. So I started thinking of how can I come back to this management aspects of business and learning the business world. Long story short, it's been a journey of just, putting yourself out there, taking risks without knowing whether or not they will pay off. But the most important thing is really having that self-awareness. Yeah, I knew teaching is great, but for some reason, I had that, the gut feeling that I don't think I'd be a great teacher as such, based on the role models that I look up to and how they conduct themselves. I'm like, I don't think I match up to that standard. Okay. So let me try and find something else. So just having self-awareness in terms of your strengths and not shying away from risks and trying something new. Yeah.
Okay. So when you look at where you are now and your teaching background, do you consider that having been like a waste of time, or is it still something that...
Is it a plus?
Is it a plus?
Oh, yes. On the plus side, it's turned out to be the greatest blessing that I didn't know I needed, because through that 4 years of, going through the course, I was building and acquiring skills that I never knew I'd need later in life. And now I apply so many of those skills because I'm mostly dealing with people management, looking at operations, and looking back sometimes when I'm dealing with situations, real life situations in my interactions, in my work, and I have to make judgments, I go back to, the skills that were instilled in me. And psychology was the best class for me back then, because then I think it has shaped how I relate with people
helps you communicate better.
In a better way than I would have. And it has also taught me some level of patience that I now appreciate. So it was not, back then I thought I wasted my time, but now that I look back, it was not a waste of time. I think it was meant to happen that way, and I still benefit from it.
You know, when most people think about venture capitalists and that whole space, people always picture Wall Street.
Wall Street, MBAs.
Yeah. If this is a path that people take, what's the starting point, or how did you get into it yourself?
How I got into it is very interesting. Again, looking for new opportunities. I got to a point where I wanted to grow. Yeah. So I was just looking for new opportunities. And when you're searching, they say mtafutaji achoki.
Yeah, choki.
Yeah. So just looking at opportunities, sending applications, and then you apply for a position to a company. They call you for an interview, and as it happens, you get the job. And funny enough, I had no idea what that company does. I tried reading the website, of course, as, preparing for the interview. But now that we are talking about it, I never for a moment paused to say, because I saw investment, I saw venture capital, but I never stopped for a while to tell myself, listen, you've only done education and you do not have any finance background, so you should probably not be applying for this opportunity. I took a chance, yeah? And when I got it, that was like an inflection point, yeah? So I'm here now, okay, where do we go from here? So start learning from scratch. That is the unconventional. It's a very unconventional path for me, but I know for most people, it will require you to have background knowledge, in finance, business management. So I built those skills. I had them more or less on the job training, yeah? Having on the job training.
And did you ever at any one point feel I'm too deep in this, I'm fucking up,
I'm out of my depth?
And how did you push through it?
It was very exciting, yeah? It was very exciting in the sense that it was a completely new field. So that was very exciting. And that's when I even learned that I thrive in those kind of dynamic environments. And the downside to that is now there was a fear of, I don't think I belong here because of, not having that background knowledge.
That imposter syndrome.
Yes. So the imposter syndrome kicks in, and then it comes with a whole lot of, feelings, emotions,
Doubt.
doubt. So you keep feeling like you constantly do not belong, right? But then again, sometimes they say, what's the worst that can happen? I'm here.
It's a very good sentence.
Yeah, what's the worst that can happen? So it's starting to to shift my mindset now to what's the worst that can happen. I'm here now, and what do I need to do to get to the next step? So that is one thing that has been a law for me. Just constantly feeling like I have to fit in, until I realized there's so many angles to it. There's the business soft side to it. There's something that I can add with my experience and my knowledge of not, being the hardcore investor, Wall Street kind of person. So I approached it from that angle. But then again, I had to very quickly start building my own tribe, people that I'm comfortable speaking to, people that, will help me see the world in a different way. And that helped a lot, because sometimes they say it's very hard. It's very hard for you to dream from something that's not visible. So just building that tribe and aligning yourself with the right people to help you navigate the world, because it's not easy. It's not easy. There's so much. The world, the life we live in is full of so many obstacles, and it's so hard for you to find your way through all that without having the right people around you and people who can relate to what you're going through. So that also forces you to be very vulnerable, which is something I didn't know how to do at first, because I'm a firstborn. And if you're a firstborn, you'll understand, you have people looking up to you, so you always have to be right. And there's no room for fuck-ups. So, So vulnerability is not something that comes naturally under those environments. But then again, I was forced to now start owning my story in an honest way. And that was, that came with a lot of self-awareness, self-knowledge, which then builds the confidence for you to even decide, now I'll start approaching people and asking these questions. Because initially I was doing a lot of, personal research, relying on my own, work on my own, until I got to a point where I owned my story. Like, I did not start here, but I'm here now, and I need to make it work. So acceptance, acceptance is the other word. And you move on from there, and you just realize, every step in life shapes your path, good or bad. It shapes your path.
The fuck-ups.
Yes. That's
right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like what you said, especially the thing around your tribe and getting yourself in environments where you can now thrive. Yeah.
Yeah.
But let's go back to venture capital again. And there's the VC world in, let's say, in East Africa or Africa in general, and the one that we actually see mostly, which is the Silicon Valley type of things. And even ourselves here looking outside, we have some perceptions, and even the VCs who come here also come in with their own perceptions. So first, what is the real difference between our venture capital and startup world compared to the Western one? Are there any dynamics?
Yes, there is. And venture capital was a foreign concept, right? So it started in Silicon Valley. It's decades old. And then we have venture capital in Africa that's probably now closing a decade or so. And as it is in any evolving environment, and there's growth, there's always, benchmarking against the global best standards or best practices. So I'd say by the time VC was imported from Silicon Valley to Africa, it came from a very mature point of view that was then directly imported to Africa. And the difference here is Africa is, first of all, Africa is not a country, it's a continent of 54 countries, each with different economies, different governments, policies, regulations, and all that. And it takes different understanding of each local nuances to grow and build a business in Africa. If you look at our demographics also, there's of course now that globally the world population is declining, and on the other hand, Africa is now rising. So the growing middle class and all that, which was not there before, and that trickles down to consumer power. So if you look at Africa, for one, you cannot compare its consumer power to the more developed world, yeah? And so that means if you're building a business in Africa, then you have to approach it from a long-term perspective, take a very long-term view, understand that it will probably take much longer for you to build a business here, a sustainable business. And sustainability here means you get to a point where you've broken even and you're revenue positive and you're profitable. It will take much longer because of the different dynamics. Yeah, and venture capital thrives on a business that's, they look at scalability. So a business that can scale beyond one country. So when you take into consideration the fact that we are very fragmented as a continent, just because you've established a business in Kenya and it's successful, it does not necessarily mean you'll have the exact chances of success. Yeah, when you go to, for example, Zambia, or even just across the border, Tanzania, Uganda, right? So there's always that aspect to consider. Consumer power, of course, also that local knowledge. So having an understanding of the local business environment also, which is very important. And that is what brings about now a lot of conversations as the industry matures, a lot of conversations now shifting from, people just running through with the models that were imported to now starting to tweak those models to understand how can we innovate and come up with fit for purpose investment models for the kind of businesses that exist in Africa.
I like what you've said about, well, it's true. The dynamics of Africa is very different. You take a 4-hour flight in America, you land in a place where the currency is the same, people speak the same language, so on and so forth. Take a 4-hour flight here, you can't buy nothing. The money you have, you can't talk to anyone. You probably can't sell anything. But that begins to create an interesting dynamic. So what gives? Okay, so there's policy, things that we are not in control of.
Yeah.
And then there is the business side, which we are doing and we want to be in control of. I know certain things here will happen or may not happen. Leadership, we can argue about it all day. But there is this other part. I mean, what is it that we begin doing? How do we start? Is it that we need to... Because a lot of what you're saying is like a mind shift. As I'm starting a business, do I start a business knowing very well that I need it to be in Uganda and start building and creating the structures for that to happen now? Where do we think small? What is it?
No, I think we think local.
We think too local. Like, what's the...
Good question. Thinking local and starting small. I think there's a very thin balance to that. I wouldn't encourage you to think local, think global. So as you're building your business, you stand higher chances of success if you think global, as opposed to, just focusing on Kenya, for example, as a country. And some of our businesses, you'll find, if you look very keenly, they could be things that only work in Nairobi, for example, like very specific geographies, yeah? So if you're building a business around that model, then it raises a lot of question around how sustainable it's going to be 10 years down the line, yeah? So think global, but start small. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, think global, but start small. So if, for example, you're building a business in Kenya, as opposed to rushing to, let's say, pitch to investors to get money to help you expand into another country like 1 year, 2 years down the line just because you've established in Kenya, try and approach it differently in the sense that how can I first of all build this business to be fully sustainable in one country before I move to the next market.
Go and replicate whatever.
And also just having that understanding of who your strategic partners would be when you now consider scaling out of one country, understanding of the time horizon, the time framework that it will take based on all those considerations, the currency issues, the fragmented policy environment, if there's any compliance issues for your business, how does that look like? And in this case, it really helps for you as an entrepreneur when you're building a business to always have someone in your corner who serves as your advisor, yeah? So you need someone who's probably started a business and founded a business and scaled or even failed at it, then you can learn from their lessons. Back to Fuckups. I like that. So having an advisor in your corner so that you're also not just relying on your own knowledge is also very important. But open yourself to possibilities. I can say fear creates limits.
A lot.
You cannot grow with fear in mind. So be open-minded, align yourself with the right people, the right partners, have the right conversations, and also have the right intentions for this business. Some of the fuck-ups here would be if you build a business based on the idea that I'm just going to get investors' money and then whether or not I succeed, it doesn't really matter. So also your mindset around why you are really building that business and what pushes you, like what motivates you.
And and back to what, based on that question, we always wonder, and I know a lot of people always battling with this. Some people have ideas, and are ideas funded? That's one question. And maybe that's another difference between what we see in Silicon Valley and what
what's the experience
or
here.
maybe what we see from the surface, because there's a lot maybe that we do not most people do not understand in depth. What matters? Are we talking about the product? Are we talking about the idea? Are we talking about the system? Are we talking about the people? Are we talking about the market? What matters in that scenario?
Good.
Or what are the differences if you look at what works in
out there
and what works here?
Yeah. So on your question on whether or not ideas are funded, it's interesting because we were having this conversation as just before starting this recording. So ideas could be funded, but realistically, I think we are moving more away from an era where ideas were being funded. And this is because, as the industry comes of age, I think the era of experiments is more or less over. There's been a lot of lessons learned, there's been failures. And so right now, I would say the most ideal is for you to have demonstrated, at least have a minimal viable product.
MVP.
That the MVP that demonstrates potential and the need for that solution that you're providing. And this means that you've identified your market, you've identified your customer base, and how you're going to, service your customers, how you're going to get your customers on board, and even simple things such as what is the cost of customer acquisition for you, because it translates into all the viability of the business. What is the cost? How long will it take for you to grow your customer base? So moving a lot more away from funding ideas to funding real solutions to real problems.
And I like
that
what
need
you said
such
about
kind of
problem
solutions.
solving. It has to solve a problem.
Solve a problem, So there's the idea. You could have a great idea, but unfortunately, it may just remain to be an idea.
So should you just have gotten your MVP, or is it best to take that approach once you've really also figured out your product market fit? Where should it? Is it in between or after?
So there's different ways to look at this, because I'd say you could still find a few type of investors who are not necessarily venture capital investors. there's another group of investors, angel investors. There's a bootstrapping era where you're relying on your, own finances, your bootstraps, your
customer
friends,
financing.
your friends, customer financing. So there's different ways to look at it. Yeah, if you are at an idea stage and you really have a great idea and you need a boost, for example, so try and look at these other category of investors who would then help you with your financing at that level of the business, before you even approach a venture capital. And the good thing about starting to work with such kind of investors, such as angel investors, is that these are people who are investing their own resources. So for one, you're going to most likely, if someone is investing in your business, it means they really believe in you, and they're going to really help you in terms of just bringing that idea to life. They'll give you the capital, but they'll also help you to structure and bring your idea to life. So build that MVP. And they'll also they'll be very honest and tell you when it's not working. So also being open to that, the fact that you need to also be very receptive to feedback for you to be able to grow to the next level where you're now attractive to a venture capital type of investors. So leverage other sources of financing around you and other sources of support around you. If you need to invest in your research and development, for example, try and look at what other ways, you can get that particular business function funded, Because for most venture capital, they want to come in at a point where there's a clear path towards the growth and profitability of this business and its need. And also just looking at the competition around you in the market, and whether you stand out or you'll easily be wiped out.
Okay. So we've seen over the years a number of startups that have been started, especially let's focus on Kenya. And most, they get the funding, mostly foreign investors, but then we're seeing a lot of failures. So where are people fucking up? Where's the problem?
First of all, it's not a sin to fail. Failure is universal. Failure is universal. And the good thing with failure is it comes with lessons. So how do you view failure and how do you redefine it or reframe that failure? So as I said, it's not a dead end. Look at it as, it's feedback. And sometimes you need to fail for you to succeed. So how are people failing? That's a good question.
Or is it just the market? Maybe
it's
they're
the
doing
market,
right.
but also if you look at statistics, they say, is it 90% of businesses fail within the first 2 to 3 years? So it's not a unique problem to Africa. And it's part of a growing ecosystem. You need to have someone go before you, make those mistakes so that they can come back and inform the next generation of businesses, the next generation of founders. There are many challenges when it comes to building a business. Like, for example, if you started a business pre-COVID and then COVID happens and you realize you've lost a huge chunk of your customer base, that is something that's completely out of your control. On the other hand, we've seen businesses that started during COVID because now there was a lot of need for, digital solutions and all that. And now the world has gone back to normal, more or less, So the question here is, do you still stand a chance? If the answer is no, there's always room to pivot. So flexibility and adapting, adaptability is also another key component for success, I'd say. You need to be ready to pivot. You need to be ready to adapt. Even the problem you're solving, the solution you're providing to your customers evolve with time. And you need to have a business model that can adapt to the changing customer needs, changing business environments, and all that.
So in many ways, do you think that that's what therefore fails? Like the lack of adaptation or a lack of adapting and the lack of evolution with the changing needs that happen? Would you say that is a huge factor?
For some, yes. For others, it could just be the suitability or the business fit. Yeah, probably it was not a really needed solution that you are trying to create,
Problem.
and there are other options for your customers. Yeah, there are other options for your customers. But also the other greatest challenge for entrepreneurs in Africa is the fact that we have infrastructural challenges. And so you could start your business today, say, for example, you want to do telemedicine, and you have not factored in the logistics angle to it. So when you hit the ground running, you realize I'm providing a digital solution, but I might as well need to, and especially if you're targeting the underserved communities, how do I ensure my product reaches them? Yeah, perhaps there's no internet connection, there's no electricity. So how do you come out of that? For some entrepreneurs, they might go an extra mile of now, so this is what you set out to build and solve, but there's added components that were not initially in your business plan that now come up as something that you also need to solve. So you're solving for more than one problem, yeah? So you're providing telemedicine to the underserved. Do they have phones? Yes. What kind of phones do they have? Are they smartphones? No. If they are smartphones, do they have access to electricity? And if they have access to electricity, are they connected to the internet? Wi-Fi, is it available? So there's also the fact around underdeveloped infrastructure posing a great challenge to most of this business, because it also takes a lot of capital to sort of, try and plug these gaps and loopholes that come up along the way.
Okay. Now, you see, and this is probably a segue to this next bit. On the flip side, you have the local founders who say that they don't have a lot of access to capital.
Yeah.
Of course, there's the obvious ones, which is banks and so on and so forth. There are a lot of new ideas that I think are not discussed enough, like, funding your business via customers and so on and so forth. But if, what would you say to such a situation? Like, is it an access problem? Is it a lack of knowledge problem? I am a guy, I have a furniture store. Yeah. I have been designing furniture. I have now even created a system where I have designed some cool furniture for small, maybe 1 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms. I want to manufacture them in sort of like large quantities. I don't have the cash to do it. If I go to a bank, it's too expensive. If you start Googling venture capital, I don't even know where you're going to end up.
Yeah.
You start watching Steve Jobs.
Yeah. It doesn't work in the streamlined way that we think it does. What would you say to that? Like, is where do we access VCs?
Where do you access VCs? Remember when I said building your tribe and positioning yourself with the right people?
Yeah.
That is a good starting point. So networking, knowing your industry, knowing who's playing in that space, knowing who's the leader in that particular field, and embracing the spirit of collaboration, especially for entrepreneurs. Sometimes when you're building something, you tend to, naturally as a human being, you might tend to think of it as if I collaborate or if I share my ideas with another entrepreneur, that angle of fear that they steal my idea.
Yeah, it's usually fear that comes from, is it a scarcity? What is it?
It's a scarcity issue. Yeah. It's a being colonized issue. it's very many PTSD
it's very
problems.
Many things. Yeah, it's PTSD. It's trauma.
Trauma. Yeah, I like that. So that starts from building the right tribe and aligning yourself with the right people. But I can also say there's also the issue of lack of knowledge, and access is also another challenge. Yeah. For example, I know if you approach a bank as a very small business, the first thing they're going to ask for is collateral. And if you do not have it, then you're too much of a risk. You're gone. They don't look at you twice. And on the other hand, there's venture capital that's looking for these opportunities, and they have money to invest. But at what point do you get to unlock such kind of financing? Yeah, so you need to have put in some work and effort into developing this business to a point where it makes sense for an investor to put in money, because they're not giving you free money. It's an investment for them.
Yeah.
That is also one thing you need to understand. And so when you approach an investor and they give you feedback and tell you you are not a fit for us right now, or you're not, you have a great idea, but it still doesn't make sense to us because this is the minimum amount we can give you, and we don't think your business is at a point where you can absorb such an amount of financing because of factor A, B, C, D, then go back and work on that. And the best approach is to take feedback as learning curves. Yeah, don't look at it as being
a block.
Yeah, it's not a block. If you take it as a learning curve, keep improving on it and maintain those relationships. Don't cut them off, because it's also a relationship business. You asked about what they invest in. They're not just investing in the business, but they're investing in you as a person. They're banking on your potential depending on how you present yourself. Yeah. And so they want to you need to inspire the confidence that you are fully aware of what you're doing, and you know very well that, whatever, like what you bring to the table, you know very well what you're bringing to the table, because they're banking on you as an individual. And you are, at the end of the day, you are the person that's going to steer this business to success, or God forbid, fuck up.
So I think globally, right now we are seeing like the startup world and the VC world is moving into AI-based whatever. When we look at East Africa, is there any sector that you think is very underrated? That you think, if it was the two of us thinking of getting into something, this is what we should look at?
I think there are some sectors that still do not receive as much investor interest or attention. And for one, those would be traditional business models that do not necessarily incorporate technology. Yeah.
They don't sound sexy enough.
Yeah, they're not. They're
Give
not
me an
sexy.
example, though.
I would say, for one, I think there's a lot of potential in the creative industry.
Okay.
But it's still very underrated to some extent. There are a few people who are now increasingly, looking at it as the next big thing. But the factors around it, in terms of how it's structured, it's still very highly informal and all that. The creative space, for example, I'd say it's one space that has a lot of potential, but it's still very underrated. Or perhaps we haven't cracked the code yet, yeah? And so there are not many people looking at that. And if you've seen the news, I've seen a lot of, news around Nairobi. Is it Nairobi Thunder, the basketball team that's now making a lot of waves? But it took someone to bank on the fact that they bought a team that was a club. Was it a club that was, nowhere, not performing, not doing anything? But it took someone to bank on the potential of what can be done to change this business trajectory. For one, if you want your players to do well and win matches, you need to invest in them, put them on a payroll so that they are able to focus, you see? So such small components. And when you look at the creative space, it's not as structured to that extent, right?
Yeah, I was about to ask.
Most people do not even have contracts. And so there's not much commitment even into the deliverables, because you're not on a contract after all. I'm a creative, and if I don't make it with this particular, sort of structure, then I'll move on to the next thing. If I'm an actor, if theater is not working for me, then let me try something else, yeah? So that for sure, but also some sectors such as education, which, it's quite critical because education is the foundation.
It's a huge pillar.
Is the foundation. But then again, when you look at that space, there's not yet, you can't, VC is looking for 10x kind of returns, but that's not a space that will give you such kind of returns. And so the question here is, how do we find a balance from, making sure that the interesting sectors keep receiving the financing, but also how do we now start to build these other sectors that are very critical, but there are different dynamics around it, yeah? So education, for example, how do we better finance such spaces? I can give those. The creatives
is really underrated. But do you think it's a packaging problem? So a lot of times with most businesses, if I'm selling this, you know that I'm going to sell this and this is the outcome.
Yeah.
A lot of times with creative, it's not very known. It's not a very open white. It's a white canvas. So this does not connect to that in a very straight line.
Yeah.
So we do have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do in terms of try to formalize it. Yeah, it has great potential, but you've said packaging problem, and I think there's also another angle to that, in the sense that as a creative, why are you even doing it? And you see, unfortunately, for some, they will not look at it. Try treating it as a business and less of something I'm good at. It's a passion, it's a talent. Because when you start treating it as a business, then you know you need to make a living out of this, and you need to grow. So just like any other business, there'll be competition. And how do you stand out? What do you have to offer? Yeah. And how do you even present yourself?
I think sometimes the word creative gets confused with abstractness.
Yeah.
So we end up, a lot of people think that
fluff.
It's not supposed to be defined. It's creative. It's
Yeah.
zen. But you're right. It needs to be packaged. It needs to be. The movies we watch are an output of a creative industry, which is very well packaged, called Hollywood or whatever it is that is now doing the thing that it's doing.
Yeah. And if you look at it, it has great potential. Look at the potential for it to create jobs, for example. Yeah. The other thing that the world is grappling with right now is there are no jobs in Africa, leave alone Africa. In Kenya, we've been on the streets the other day because we are saying we cannot continue, under certain circumstances, because first of all, we do not have even enough jobs. So the creative space is it has great potential to fill such gaps, create jobs, but that can only be possible with a bit of, formalization to it. Yeah. It's okay for it to be a canvas, and try and then have a team around you. So you cannot be the creative, and you can also not be your own accountant. You can also not be, and I can see even here you have a production manager, right? So you cannot do that by yourself. Try and build a proper structure and a team. Yeah.
Okay.
To support
Now going
you.
back to yourself.
Yeah.
What are the hardest lessons you've learned from being in leadership?
Hardest lessons. Wow. People management is hard. But also, you cannot have it all together. Yeah. I know sometimes, I used to think that, when you see someone in certain positions, then they have it all figured out.
You see Peter Mwang in Safaricom and you think, ooh.
No. Yeah, that is a very good lesson I've learned. It's not possible for you to have it all together at the same time. You'll make mistakes, but at the end of the day is how you come out of such situations that will determine your next step.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. Also, just relationships, they can be difficult to manage at some point, like any other relationships in life, because for a business relationship, there's always the angle of what do I have to give and what am I getting? So finding that balance. Yeah.
How do you deal with people management now?
How do you even deal with those hard moments? Yeah.
Remember my education degree,
Yeah.
Psychology 101, tab 231.
That's what you rely on, yes. Go back to that.
Yeah, that's what I rely on. But also just being open to possibilities and the world around you, and being very intentional about self-awareness, self-knowledge, so that you can, know when to handle situations, look at what fuels you, what drains you, and how do I interact with those different dynamics? Where do I spend my time? What do I spend my time on? What do I stop and pause or assess before I say yes? And that is also another very good lesson. Like you cannot always be available for everyone, and you have to understand that, even though it may feel like you are letting someone down, but just knowing that you cannot be available to everyone at the same time, because the more you do it, you tend to overextend yourself to a point where you are not very helpful, or even if you are, it comes at a cost on you. Yeah, takes so much from you, and it drains you. So having like an energy audit, what drains me today, what fuels me, and what should I focus on, and finding the balance. Yeah.
Okay.
So I want to go back into something. I've given you 100 million today, or let's say you have 100 million.
In dollars.
In dollars. Where are you going to invest it in East Africa?
Wow.
It feels better now that you're on the other side of this conversation.
Where am I going to invest 100 million right now? Goodness gracious, I'm going to put it in schools, in the rurals, in building infrastructure, in making sure people have access to healthcare, which is a very basic need, and empowering such communities to be even self-reliant and self-sustainable in terms of economic activities. I would focus on that. Yeah.
So I'll ask you, there's a joke I saw online that if you go to like a tech networking event, like probably you just went there for the food, and someone points at you and asks you to ask a question, you should just have one question in mind. Is it scalable? So is it scalable?
To this extent, I will say there'll be different considerations for it. And I would also, in my own definition, say scalability could be relative. Yeah. In this case, I'm looking more at sustainability and sustainable economic solutions. Yeah. Because until someone puts in the effort to clear the ground, then scalability is going to be very hard to achieve. And I prefer to be, that someone who clears the ground and cleans up the space for scalability to thrive. But it's a good point. So what would be the answer to that? When
it's
you're
relative.
asked whether it's No, not according to my definition. Scalability. No, but in real sense, if you're building a global business, then scalability is very, very important. Yeah.
Because then it leads me to this question.
To the debate.
There's this debate as to where do we go? I mean, is it impact investing or is it pure profit investing? In this case, on your example, where does that fall? It falls in the impact side, or
it's both. There's no impact without profitability. Yeah.
And vice versa?
Is there a profit without impact?
There could be a profit without impact. I'm not so sure about that, but I'd say it's both. You have to strike a balance between impact and profitability. The only difference here is depending on your risk appetite and how much you're willing to lose, because investments is also, it's not guaranteed. You're taking chances. So depending on how much you're willing to lose, for example, it's very important to strike that balance between impact and profitability. So impact, you're looking at, social change, jobs created, and without being profitable, I may not have the resources or the liquidity to keep doing it. Yeah. So the difference would be then, for example, if you have an impact investor, they may say their emphasis is a lot more around the impact created, but there has to be sustainability in terms of a certain amount of return they'll expect. It will not be as much as a typical venture capital guy. And that's okay. Whereas on the other side, for a venture capital guy, they look at the return they get and what impact have they created along the way. So look at it again from very different angles, but the two go hand in hand.
Okay.
You cannot separate, and especially in today's world. Yeah.
And in startups today, what is that thing that you feel internally needs to be fixed before they start thinking about investment?
And mainly, let's focus on Kenya and East Africa.
Kenya and East Africa.
What needs to be fixed internally? Mindset.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Mindset is very important. But also, I think at some point we've gone through periods where we were almost led to believe that once I start a venture and I'm now a startup founder, the next big thing would be for me to approach the next available investor. So shifting your mindset around that, because it raises questions around what your core motivation is for starting this business. Yeah. So mindset shift. And also just building confidence in the sense that, you remember when I talked about imposter syndrome and fear of failure? Let's embrace failure, because as I said, failure creates limits, and then you cannot grow. So building that confidence from within and being okay with the fact that, you will do it, you will try, and you'll go hard at it. If you fail, so be it. It's okay to fail and start all over again. It's not the end of the world. Yeah.
I think this conversation needs its very own podcast. Candle. But because of time, we'll need to start winding down. So, but before we get to the rapid fire questions, Jim, is there any burning question you still
maybe
have?
on a personal level, like what keeps you grounded? Like, what do you do? What's your escape outside of work?
My escape outside of work. Oh God, what do I do? What keeps me grounded? First of all, I thrive in being around people who bring me positive energy. So those connections are very important. But
so a concert.
A concert would be great. Catch up with friends over food. I love food. It's also another way to keep me grounded, and also just sharing, talking to people. I love cooking. I love traveling. So yeah.
Okay. And by the way, just so you know, I don't know whether you've noticed, but higher education thing comes up in the way you explain things. Like you, am I right? Like she explains things in a very methodical way.
Yeah.
If you are wondering if it ever comes out, it does.
Okay.
It does. Maybe we can go to the quick fire ones now.
Yes, so we'll move to the quick fire. So don't think about it.
Okay.
Whatever comes in mind, just blurt it out. So what's your secret morning ritual?
You told me not to think. I'm already thinking. My secret morning ritual is get out of bed.
Not dilly-dally,
no snoozing.
You don't snooze.
Oh no, I do not. If I snooze, then that's it. It's the end. So get out of bed. My alarm rings and just get up and get running.
Okay. We'll come for mentorship.
That one I need to. Yeah.
Coffee or tea?
That's a tricky one. Right now, I'll say tea. It used to be coffee a few years back.
What's one fun fact about your journey so far? Something that we haven't brought up.
I'm always happy with whatever outcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a skill a lot of us need to learn.
Yeah.
Okay.
And very calm.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. If you could have any superpower for a day, what would it be?
Okay. Any superpower for a day? I've actually thought of if I could be a magician and I can just speak words and say Kenya is closed for a day and nothing happens.
And then?
And then everything comes to a standstill.
To wash it, to forget, to
nothing.
fix
like
the
nothing
country.
moves. Like if I say freeze.
Oh, like to
having those powers, like having those kind of powers. But something that gets to me a lot is, when you're dealing with matatus and overlapping, sometimes I just wish there could be a technology that just inflates their tires or something, and I don't necessarily need to put in the work. It's just like magic wand like this. Yeah. Dealing with annoying people. Yeah.
We can invest in that.
That's scalable.
Yeah.
What's your go-to song when you need a mood boost?
And I need a mood boost. Tell me, what do you see when you're looking at me?
That's a good one.
That one.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
It
hypes me
It
up.
has the energy.
Yeah, it hypes me up.
I have a question also when you're done.
Okay. What's one hobby you can't live without?
One hobby I can't live without: cooking.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you could travel anywhere right now, where would you go?
I don't know. I love Africa, so you can leave me somewhere in Victoria Falls.
Sawa.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
The best piece of advice. I've gotten many, but the best one was, you're not supposed to be comfortable, and if you become comfortable, you've stopped growing. Yeah.
Okay, it's related to the if you're stagnant, you're dying.
Yeah.
In one word, how would you describe your life right now?
Amazing.
Okay, Jamie.
The one question I had was this. So if you
Yeah.
had 6 months, right? No responsibilities, no emails, what would you do?
Travel
To where?
all over the world.
Victoria Falls.
That's just one tiny bit of it. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd love to go to Jerusalem because I don't know what it looks like.
There's a Jerusalem in
Not this one. Not this one.
Panda 23 when the
Not that one.
Let's call it Salem.
No. Go to Jerusalem and see if whatever is written in the Bible about Jerusalem is true.
It's true.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think that brings us to a close.
Yeah, that was a very insightful
I think
conversation.
the whole space of venture capital personally is something that I'm really intrigued by.
Yeah.
It has a lot of gray areas, and I hope that anyone who's watching this is going to get some value in this.
Yeah.
It's definitely a subject that we cannot finish in one sitting.
No, you cannot.
Each and every component of it, especially when you start looking at what do we need to be funded, where at what stage, and so on and so forth. Career paths, maybe you're someone who wants to jump into that, because I think there's not much. They haven't met very many people like you. So, and especially what I love about you is, if we're discussing funding and funding is coming from an external source to here, it helps to have people who are local, who understand the nuances, who understand what's happening, because that's where the change is going to begin happening from. So I'm super happy to have you here. Thank you for making the time. If you're looking at this show, please subscribe. Please follow our socials. There's a lot of value that we have, and we love hearing from you. So please hit us on anything that you see at the bottom here. So we look forward to the next show. Thank you, Sana Jackie.
Asante.
Have a good one.
Yeah. Thank
Asante
you.
sana.
Thank you
It
for
was
having
really great.
me. Yeah. Thank
And
you.
also to the audience, in case you have someone who you believe that this content will be very interesting to, someone getting into starting a startup or just wanting to get into this VC world, I think just share this episode with them, and I'm sure this will be very useful to them. So thank you, Jackie. It was great having you.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's a wrap.